The morning sun glinted off the glass walls of Chen Technologies headquarters, casting golden reflections across the bustling streets of downtown. Alexander Chen adjusted his perfectly tailored suit as he reviewed his presentation one last time. At 35, he had everything most people could only dream of: a penthouse overlooking the city, a fleet of luxury cars, and a company worth billions. Yet something felt missing, a void he couldn't quite name. 5 minutes until the product launch, Mr. Chen, his assistant, called through the intercom. Alexander nodded to himself, gathering the calm confidence that had become his trademark. This launch would cement Chen Technologies as the leading innovation company of the decade. Their new virtual reality platform would revolutionize how people connected across the globe. The presentation hall buzzed with excitement. Journalists from every major tech publication filled the front rows, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Investors and industry leaders sat behind them, already anticipating the surge in stock prices that typically followed Alexander's announcements. As he stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. Alexander had mastered this dance, the perfect blend of charm and authority that kept everyone hanging on his every word. The giant screens behind him came to life, displaying the sleek design of their latest creation. 10 years ago, I made a promise, he began, his voice carrying across the hall. I promised to change how we see the world. The words felt hollow in his mouth, though no one else would notice. He remembered making that same promise to someone else, in a very different context, in what felt like another lifetime. His presentation flowed smoothly, each point hitting its mark. The audience gasped at the right moments, applauded at others. Alexander was in his element, or at least he should have been. But halfway through demonstrating the virtual reality headset's capabilities, something caught his eye in the middle of the crowd. A woman stood up, her movement drawing his attention. For a split second, their eyes met, and Alexander's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. Those eyes, he would know them anywhere. They haunted his dreams for the past decade, eyes that held the warmth of summer sunsets and the depth of unspoken promises. Claire. His heart stumbled, but his voice didn't falter. Years of business negotiations had taught him to maintain composure under any circumstances. But his mind raced. She looked different, more polished, more confident, but underneath, she was still the Claire who used to paint until sunrise, who could talk about art for hours, who believed in him before anyone else did. The rest of the presentation passed in a blur. Alexander answered questions on autopilot, his thoughts scattered between the present and memories of lazy Sunday mornings filled with laughter and dreams. When he finally stepped off stage, his assistant handed him a stack of business cards from potential partners, but Alexander barely noticed. He scanned the dispersing crowd, looking for her, but Claire had vanished. Maybe she was never there at all. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him, punishing him for choices made long ago. But deep down, he knew what he saw was real. Back in his office, Alexander stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below. The launch had been a success. Chen Technologies' stock was already climbing. His phone buzzed continuously with congratulatory messages and meeting requests. This was everything he had worked for, sacrificed for. He pulled out his wallet, reaching for a hidden compartment he hadn't opened in years. Inside was a worn photograph, its edges soft from handling. 2 young people smiled at the camera. A younger version of himself and Claire, standing in front of her first art exhibition. Her eyes sparkled with the same light he'd seen today, and his own face showed a joy he barely recognized anymore. The intercom buzzed, startling him. "Mr. Chen, the board is waiting for the post-launch meeting." Alexander tucked the photo away and straightened his tie. Success had its price, and he paid it willingly. He'd chosen this path, chosen the empire over love. Yet seeing Claire today made him question, for the first time in 10 years, whether he truly won or lost. As he walked toward the boardroom, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was about to change. The empire he'd built suddenly felt like a castle made of glass, impressive but fragile, transparent yet empty. Something was coming, something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, happiness, and what truly matters in life. Little did he know, tomorrow would bring a visitor who would shatter that glass castle completely, forcing him to confront the true cost of his ambitions and the possibility that his greatest success might also be his biggest failure. The morning after the product launch, Alexander sat in his office, trying to focus on the mountain of contracts before him. But his mind kept drifting back to those familiar eyes in the crowd. He'd barely slept, haunted by memories he'd locked away years ago. His intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Chen, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal and urgent." His assistant's voice held an unusual note of uncertainty. "I don't take unscheduled meetings," Alexander replied automatically, but something made him pause. "Who is it?" "Claire Matthews." The name hung in the air like a spell. Alexander's hands grew cold. "Send her in," he said, his voice barely steady. The door opened, and there she was, not a glimpse in a crowd this time, but real and solid. Claire walked in with the grace of someone completely at ease with themselves, so different from the carefree artist he'd known. Her simple blazer and jeans spoke of quiet confidence, a far cry from the paint-splattered clothes she used to wear. "Hello, Alexander," she said softly. Before he could respond, she stepped aside, revealing someone behind her. A young boy walked in, carrying a backpack covered in space and science stickers. Alexander's world stopped spinning. The boy had his mother's gentle smile, but everything else, the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the way he held himself, even the slight tilt of his head as he studied the room, was like looking in a mirror of the past. "This is Ryan," Claire said, resting her hands protectively on the boy's shoulders. "Your son." Alexander gripped the edge of his desk, grateful he was already sitting down. How he couldn't form a complete thought, let alone a sentence. "He's 9, Claire continued, her voice calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I tried to tell you when I found out. I called for weeks. Your number was changed, your family wouldn't pass on messages, and your company's legal team made it very clear I wasn't to contact you." The boy, Ryan, stepped forward, his curiosity apparently overcoming his hesitation. "Is that a quantum computing model?" he asked, pointing to a prototype displayed on a shelf. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. Alexander nodded automatically, his throat tight. "Yes, it's our latest project. You know about quantum computing." "I read about it. Mom got me some books when I started asking questions about computers." Ryan smiled, and Alexander saw Claire in that smile, the same warmth that had once made his heart race. Claire cleared her throat softly. "Ryan, honey, could you wait outside with Ms. Lee for a moment? I need to talk to Mr. Chen alone." Once the door closed behind Ryan, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Why now?" Alexander managed to ask. Claire ran a hand through her hair, a familiar gesture that made his heart ache. "Because he started asking questions, real questions about you. And because," she paused, collecting her thoughts, "because he deserves to know where he comes from, and you deserve to know about him. Despite everything." "I never knew," Alexander said, his voice hoarse. "Claire, if I had known." "Would it have made a difference?" she cut in. "You made your choice very clear 10 years ago. Your dreams were bigger than us, remember?" The words hit him like physical blows because they were true. He'd been so focused on building his empire, so convinced that success meant sacrifice. "I was wrong," he whispered, surprising himself with the admission. Claire's expression softened slightly. "Maybe, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because our son is brilliant, curious, and starting to ask questions I can't answer alone. He deserves to know both sides of his heritage, even if one side is," she gestured at the opulent office, "all of this." Alexander stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. "I want to know him. Please. I know I have no right to ask, but—" "You don't," Claire agreed. "But this isn't about rights, it's about Ryan. He needs to know who he is, where he comes from. Both the good and the bad." She pulled out a card and placed it on his desk. "This is my gallery's contact information. We can talk about how to move forward, but it has to be on Ryan's terms." "And Alexander?" Her eyes met his, fierce and protective. "Don't you dare hurt him like you hurt me." As Claire turned to leave, Alexander found his voice again. "The gallery, you did it. Your dream." She paused at the door, a small smile playing at her lips. Yes, I did. Without compromising who I am or who I love. Remember that. The door closed behind her, leaving Alexander alone with a business card, 1,000 questions, and the earth-shattering knowledge that while he'd been building his empire of glass and steel, he'd missed out on something far more precious, watching his son grow up. Outside, through his window, he could see Claire and Ryan walking toward their car. Ryan looked up at the towering building, pointing at something, his face animated as he talked to his mother. Alexander pressed his hand against the glass, watching his son disappear into the city that had given him everything and taken even more. The news about Alexander Chen's secret child spread through the business world like wildfire. He sat in his home office, scrolling through endless news articles and social media posts, each one picking apart his carefully constructed image. The morning headlines glared at him from his tablet. Tech Titan's hidden heir revealed, and Chen Technologies CEO's past catches up. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. The board wanted an emergency meeting, investors were demanding explanations, and his PR team was in crisis mode. But Alexander couldn't focus on any of it. Instead, he kept looking at a photo of Ryan he'd managed to find online from one of his school's science competitions. The boy stood proudly next to a project about renewable energy, his smile bright and confident. "Sir," his home assistant interrupted his thoughts, "Mr. Wong from the board is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Put him through." "Chen, this is a disaster." Mr. Wong's voice crackled through the speaker. "Our stock dropped 15 points this morning. Investors are questioning your judgment, and Lai Technologies is using this chaos to push for their takeover bid." "The stock will recover," Alexander replied mechanically, but his eyes stayed fixed on Ryan's photo. "This isn't just about the stock, it's about trust, stability. The board is calling for an emergency vote of confidence. You need to get ahead of this." The words barely registered. All Alexander could think about was how he'd missed 9 years of science projects, birthdays, and first days of school. The empire he'd built suddenly seemed hollow, built on the foundation of what he'd given up. His security chief knocked on his door, entering with a grim expression. "Sir, we have a situation. Reporters have found out where your son goes to school. They're camping outside the building." Alexander's head snapped up, real fear gripping his heart. "What? Ms. Matthews already called. She's furious. The school had to bring in extra security to keep the media away." For the first time in years, Alexander felt completely out of control. He'd always been the one pulling the strings, calculating every move, but now his worlds were colliding in ways he couldn't manage. He grabbed his phone, dialing Claire's number with shaking fingers. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anger. "I hope you're happy. My son can't even go to school without being harassed by photographers." "Claire, I'm so sorry. I'm handling it. I'll have my security team." "Handle it, like you handle everything else. With money and power." She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was calmer but no less fierce. "Ryan is confused and scared. He doesn't understand why people are suddenly so interested in him. He's just a kid, Alexander." The pain in her voice cut through him like a knife. "Tell me what you need me to do." "I need you to be a father, not a CEO. Can you even do that?" Before he could answer, his other line beeped. The board secretary's name flashed on the screen. "Mr. Chen, the vote is starting in 10 minutes. Your presence is required." Alexander stood in his office, literally caught between two worlds. On one line, the empire he'd spent a decade building was about to vote on his future. On the other, the mother of his child was waiting to see if he could be more than the ambitious man who'd walked away 10 years ago. "I'll have to call the board back," he said finally. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, "Mr. Lai is already in the boardroom. He's presenting his takeover proposal." "Let him," Alexander replied, surprising himself with how little he cared. "Claire, where are you? I'm coming over. We need to figure this out together." The silence on the other end seemed to stretch forever. "We're at home," she finally said. "Ryan's pretty shaken up. Text me the address. I'll be there in 20 minutes." As Alexander grabbed his keys, his assistant called out, "Sir, the board, your company." For the first time in my life, Alexander said, I'm choosing something more important than the company. The drive to Claire's house gave him time to think. Each mile marked another crack in the glass walls he built around himself. His phone kept buzzing. Board members, investors, reporters, but he ignored them all. The weekend arrived with a gentle morning rain, and Alexander found himself standing in front of Claire's house again, holding a box of science equipment he'd carefully selected for Ryan. His hands felt sweaty. Facing billion-dollar negotiations had never made him this nervous. "You came," Ryan said, opening the door. He was wearing a telescope-patterned t-shirt, and his eyes lit up at the sight of the box. "I promised I would," Alexander replied softly. Every time he saw his son, the resemblance struck him anew. "I brought something for your science project, if you'd like to take a look." Claire appeared behind Ryan, coffee mug in hand. She looked tired, but gave a small nod of approval. "You can set up in the garage. That's where the science magic usually happens." The garage had been converted into a makeshift laboratory meets art studio. One side held Claire's paintings and supplies, while the other was Ryan's domain, filled with science fair ribbons, half-finished experiments, and carefully labeled collections of rocks and leaves. "Mom lets me use this space for my projects," Ryan explained, clearing a spot on his workbench. "She says creativity doesn't care if it's art or science." Alexander's throat tightened as he watched Ryan carefully unpack the box. Here was the perfect blend of both his parents, Claire's artistic soul and his analytical mind. "What are you working on now?" Ryan's face lit up. "I'm trying to build a small solar-powered water filtration system, but I can't get the flow rate right." He pulled out his notebook, filled with careful calculations and drawings. "City?" For the next 2 hours, they worked together, Alexander guiding rather than leading, watching in amazement as Ryan's quick mind grasped complex concepts. Claire checked on them occasionally, her expression softening each time she saw them deep in discussion. "You're good at this," she said later, as they watched Ryan excitedly show his improved project to the neighbor's kid through the garage window. "He makes it easy," Alexander admitted. "He's brilliant, Claire, and kind. You did an amazing job raising him." "He is." She paused, wrapping her arms around herself. "But he's also stubborn, gets frustrated when things don't work perfectly the first time, and can talk about space for 3 hours straight." Her eyes met his, just like his father. The words hummed between them, heavy with meaning. "I want to be part of his life, Claire, really part of it, not just weekend visits and science projects." "It's not that simple. You can't just walk in after 9 years and—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I know I have to earn it, both your trust and his. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance." Claire studied him for a long moment. "You've changed." "Losing my company helped with that." He smiled wryly. The media was still having a field day with his absence from the crucial board meeting. Light Technology's takeover bid was gaining momentum. "About that?" Claire hesitated. "Ryan's been worried. He saw the news about Chen Technologies and thinks it's his fault you're losing your company." Alexander's heart clenched. "Can I talk to him?" She nodded toward the backyard, where Ryan was sitting on the old swing set, looking at his phone. Alexander walked over, leaves crunching under his feet. "Hey, buddy, mind if I join you?" Ryan shrugged, but moved over on the wide swing. "I saw online that your company's in trouble because of me." "No," Alexander said firmly. "Look at me. None of this is your fault. The company, it's just things and money. But you're my son. Nothing is more important than that." "But you worked so hard for it. Mom told me stories about how you used to dream about changing the world with technology." Alexander looked at the boy beside him, seeing himself at that age, full of dreams and questions about the world. "Want to know a secret? The best inventions come from right here." He pointed to Ryan's garage workshop. "From people who aren't afraid to mix art and science, who see the world differently. Your mom taught me that a long time ago." Ryan's face brightened slightly. "Really?" "Really. In fact." Alexander paused, an idea forming. "What would you think about helping me with a new project? Something that combines technology and creativity." "What kind of project?" "Well, that solar filtration system you're working on, imagine making that available to kids everywhere. Teaching them how to build it, customize it, make it their own, like a fusion of science and art." Ryan's eyes widened. Could we really do that? With your brains and your mom's artistic vision, I think we could do anything. Alexander glanced at Claire, who was watching them from the porch. If your mom agrees, of course. That evening, as Alexander prepared to leave, Ryan surprised him with a quick hug. See you next weekend, he asked hopefully. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Alexander promised, his voice rough with emotion. Claire walked him to his car. You know, she said softly, that project idea, it's not bad. I meant what I said. All of it. The company, the money, none of it matters compared to him. Too, he stopped himself before saying to you both. She seemed to hear it anyway. One step at a time, Alexander. One step at a time. As he drove home, past the gleaming towers of his crumbling empire, Alexander realized he felt lighter than he had in years. Sometimes, he thought, you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you needed. The conference room felt different now. The stark white walls and sleek glass table that once symbolized Alexander's professional triumph now seemed cold and lifeless. Maya sat across from him, her posture confident but her eyes carrying a mix of curiosity and careful distance. Alexander couldn't help but notice how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, exactly the way Elena used to do. It was like looking at a living memory, a bridge between his past and present. I brought some things, Maya said, pulling out a worn leather folder. Her hands were steady, but Alexander caught a slight tremor that betrayed her inner emotions. My mother kept everything carefully documented. The first document she placed on the table was a school report card. Perfect grades, multiple commendation letters, achievements that spoke of dedication and hard work. But it wasn't just academic excellence that caught Alexander's eye. Each report card had handwritten notes from teachers praising Maya's compassion, her ability to help fellow students, her commitment to community service. I didn't know about you, Maya said quietly. My mother protected me from that part of our history. She always said that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank balance, but by how they treat others. Alexander felt a strange tightness in his chest. Those words could have been pulled directly from Elena's spirit, a philosophy so different from his own cutthroat business approach. The next set of documents told a story that hit Alexander harder than any business negotiation ever could. Photographs of Elena working in community centers, teaching children, organizing support groups for single mothers. Each image revealed a woman of incredible strength and compassion. There was a community center in a struggling neighborhood, completely funded by Elena's tireless work. Small donations, community fundraisers, countless hours of volunteer work. The center provided education, healthcare support, and vocational training to families struggling to make ends meet. She built this from nothing, Maya explained, her voice a mixture of pride and emotion. Every penny was hard-earned. She believed that real change happens not through massive corporate strategies, but through personal connections. A particular photograph caught Alexander's attention. Elena, standing with a group of young women, all smiling. A handwritten note on the back read, "Empowerment is not about grand gestures, but consistent support." Maya continued sharing stories, how her mother worked night shifts as a nurse while studying social work during the day, how she managed to send Maya to a good school through scholarships and part-time jobs, how she never spoke ill of Alexander, instead teaching Maya about forgiveness and understanding. She always said that people are complex, Maya said, that nobody is entirely good or bad, that everyone has the potential to change. The documents weren't just a history lesson, they were an invitation, a challenge to Alexander to see beyond his limited worldview. Each paper, each photograph was a piece of a larger puzzle that challenged everything he believed about success. Alexander realized something profound in that moment. His billions, his corporate empire, his carefully cultivated image, they suddenly felt hollow compared to Elena's genuine impact. She had changed lives, one person at a time, with nothing more than determination and compassion. I want you to understand, Maya said, her voice calm but firm, I'm not here looking for money or inheritance. I'm here because my mother believed in giving people a chance to understand themselves. The room fell silent. The air seemed charged with unspoken emotions, years of missed connections, and unexpected revelations. For the first time in years, Alexander felt truly seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a corporate strategist, but as a human being with the capacity to learn, to grow, to change. Maya's presence was more than just a biological connection. She was a living testament to Elena's philosophy, that true wealth lies in human potential, in compassion, in the ability to lift others up. As the afternoon light filtered through the conference room windows, Alexander understood that his greatest challenge wasn't going to be a business merger or a market strategy. It was going to be rebuilding a relationship with a daughter he had never known and understanding a worldview that was entirely different from his own. This was going to be his most important journey yet. The weeks following Maya's arrival changed everything Alexander thought he knew about himself. His corner office, once a symbol of power and achievement, now felt like a glass cage of his own making. Late one evening, surrounded by years of awards and corporate achievements, Alexander found himself staring at a photograph Maya had brought, a picture of Elena working with a group of children in a small, worn-out community center. The walls were peeling, the furniture was mismatched, but the smiles were bright and genuine. He remembered the board meetings where he dismissed community investment proposals as non-strategic or low-return initiatives. How many times had he looked at social projects as mere tax write-offs? Now, those memories felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Maya hadn't demanded anything from him. Instead, she simply shared her mother's life work, stories of real impact that didn't show up on balance sheets, community centers that transformed entire neighborhoods, scholarship programs that gave hope to kids who thought education was beyond their reach, small victories that meant everything to those who experienced them. One morning, Alexander called an emergency board meeting. His executive team looked confused. This wasn't his typical gathering style. "We're changing direction," he announced, his voice different from its usual authoritative tone. There was a vulnerability, a genuineness that surprised everyone in the room. He outlined a radical new approach. The company would redirect 40% of its annual profits into targeted community development programs, not as a PR stunt, but as a genuine commitment to creating real change. Education initiatives in underserved communities, healthcare support for families struggling to make ends meet, vocational training programs that would give people real opportunities. His chief financial officer looked shocked. "This will impact our quarterly returns," he stammered. Alexander smiled. A real smile, not the calculated corporate grin he perfected over years. "Some returns can't be measured in dollars," he replied. The transformation wasn't easy. Years of corporate conditioning don't disappear overnight. There were moments of doubt, of falling back into old patterns. But Maya was patient. She would share stories of her mother's work, helping Alexander understand that true success was about lifting others, not just climbing higher. He started spending time in the community centers his company now supported. Not as a photo opportunity, but as a genuine learner. He listened to stories of single parents working multiple jobs, of teenagers fighting against systemic barriers, of communities coming together to support each other. One particular afternoon changed everything. He was visiting a vocational training center his company had recently funded. A young woman approached him, her eyes bright with hope. "Because of this program," she said, "I'm the first in my family to have a stable job. My younger siblings can now dream of going to college." Those words hit harder than any million-dollar contract he'd ever signed. The company's transformation wasn't just about money. It was about creating pathways, about believing in human potential. Alexander learned to see beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. He learned to see people. Maya watched this transformation quietly. She didn't celebrate with grand gestures or emotional speeches. Her approach was subtle, sharing, listening, gently guiding. His old friends in the corporate world were confused. Some criticized his new approach, calling it naive. Others saw it as a midlife crisis. But Alexander had never felt more clear-headed. The legacy he was building now wasn't about wealth accumulation. It was about creating opportunities, about understanding that success meant something entirely different from what he believed his entire life. At night, going through Elena's old documents, he would often find himself overwhelmed. Not with grief, but with a profound sense of understanding. She had known something he had taken years to learn, that compassion was the most powerful strategy of all. His daughter had become his greatest teacher. Through her, he was reconnecting with a part of himself he didn't know existed, a capacity for empathy, for genuine human connection. The transformation was just beginning, and for the first time in his life, Alexander was excited about a future that wasn't defined by his net worth, but by the lives he could potentially change. 5 years had passed since Maya walked into Alexander's life, turning his world upside down. The transformation wasn't just a moment, it was a continuous journey of understanding, healing, and growth. Their relationship wasn't picture perfect. It was messy, complicated, filled with awkward conversations and moments of deep connection. They were learning each other, two people from completely different worlds, connected by blood and a shared loss. Every Sunday became their ritual. No fancy restaurants or expensive outings. Instead, they would visit the community centers Elena had once supported. Alexander would listen as Maya shared stories about her mother's work, about the lives touched, the dreams nurtured. The company had changed dramatically. What was once a cold, profit-driven machine was now a platform for real change. Scholarships for students from low-income families, healthcare support programs, vocational training centers, these were now the company's true measure of success. Alexander's colleagues had initially been skeptical. Corporate boardrooms aren't typically places of emotional transformation, but as results started showing, not in monetary profits, but in human potential realized, even the most hardened executives began to understand. One afternoon, while going through some old documents, Maya discovered something unexpected. A collection of letters Elena had written but never sent to Alexander. They weren't angry or accusatory. Instead, they were filled with hope, hope that one day he might understand the true meaning of success. "Read this," Maya said, her voice soft but strong, handing him a yellowed envelope. The letter spoke of dreams, of possibilities. Elena had written about her vision of a world where success wasn't measured by bank balances, but by the number of lives touched, the opportunities created. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he read. Tears weren't something he was familiar with, but they came unbidden now. He realized how much he had missed, not just with Maya, but with himself. Their work together became something special. Maya, now a key strategist in the company, brought a perspective that was both practical and deeply compassionate. She wasn't just his daughter, she was his partner in reimagining what a business could be. They started a foundation in Elena's name. It wasn't just a memorial, it was a living, breathing testament to her philosophy. Each program, each initiative was carefully designed to create sustainable change. Local communities began to notice the difference. Schools that were once struggling now had resources. Young people who thought higher education was impossible were now finding pathways to their dreams. Healthcare reached places it had never touched before. Alexander's transformation wasn't just professional. He was learning to be a father, something he had no experience with. There were awkward moments, misunderstandings, times when the generational gap felt like an ocean. But there were beautiful moments too. Quiet evenings discussing life, shared laughter, the gradual building of trust. Maya was patient, understanding that healing takes time. The media loved their story. A cold-hearted billionaire transformed by a daughter he never knew. But they didn't see the daily work, the small moments of connection, the genuine learning that was happening. On the 5th anniversary of Maya's arrival, they stood together at the community center Elena had first worked in. The building had been completely renovated, now a beacon of hope for the neighborhood. She would have been proud, Maya said, looking around. Alexander realized something profound in that moment. Success wasn't about winning, it was about understanding, about connection, about leaving the world a little better than you found it. His empire now stood for something more than profit. It stood for possibility, for hope, for the belief that every human being deserves a chance to grow, to dream, to become. As the sunset painted the community center in warm hues, Alexander understood that his greatest achievement wasn't the billions he had accumulated. It was the life he was now building, with his daughter, in memory of a woman who had always seen the potential for change. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning.